Live here again on our Facebook investor page. So I want to welcome all of you guys here for our meeting. What we're going to do this week is we don't have a guest where we've had guests in the last few weeks, but we are going to be the guests. Frank and I will be the subject matter experts, and Scott is going to be our interviewer and ask us some questions in regards to the daily meetings that we have with new investors. One of the things that I'm seeing is when we're on these calls, we get the same question over and over again. And a lot of times, new investors are trying to fit the answers into one box. And it's just not possible to do that. So I've created a list of questions that we're going to pass off to Scott. And Scott, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of lead us through those.
Blaze, just mention to these guys now. You said you and I are going to be the ones answering, but guys, feel free to jump in and answer. Doesn't have to be us because you're doing these calls too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Scott, all yours.
All right. Hey, I'm thinking about doing some investing. What kind of returns can I expect on a rental if I purchase at $99,000?
Oh man, you're going to retire.
So with that, basically what I'm hearing is somebody's looking to say, okay, my budget is $99,000. What type of returns can I expect to get from that $99,000? Whether I'm financing, paying cash, whatever it is, they want to know what type of returns that they can get and take all of that information, put it into one little box. And unfortunately, you just can't do that because $99,000 gets you a different property in different areas, as well as the style of the property has a lot to do with it. If you've got a ranch versus a two-story, it makes a big difference. So trying to say
versus multi, I mean, you could buy a $60,000 house that shows a huge cash flow, and that may be an issue. You can buy a $99,000 that's showing you nice, steady returns. It just depends on the area, and until one of us does the analysis, you're not going to know, to be honest with you.
Right. And honestly, just like we encourage all of our realtors to do, is constantly be running an analysis to learn and get better at doing these. It's in addition to that, it's the investor themselves needs to constantly be running the numbers on these properties as well so that they get used to it and how it affects the different areas. Because I'll have people that will send me over 3 or 4 properties and we'll go through and maybe none of them work. But as we get further down the road into a week or two into it, they realize right away they're looking for key indicators of what would make that a bad investment. Let's say, you're looking at the listing and utilities or something are paid by the owner. Well, then that creates other questions. So again, we're just trying not to box it all into one price point and say I should get the exact same return across the board. It's all going to depend on the location and the property that you're buying.
All right. So what grade or risk level are the properties in this area?
That's a common question because people come to us just assuming they're going right into Cleveland. That's the only town they've heard of out here is Cleveland. And even in Cleveland, there's different risk levels depending on where you're going. But if they're buying in Akron, if they're buying in Canton, it's the same thing. I mean, Mike, Canton, there's different risk levels, right? But based on where you're muted, but yeah, based on where you're going to buy. You can buy A plus all the way down to carry a couple of guns when you go to the house.
Isn't that the truth? And you got pockets. Let's use Cleveland for that example because everybody knows Cleveland. You get down there around Little Italy and you're within a block or two, you can have some really, really high rents. Or over in Ohio City, you can have really high rents. 3 blocks away, you're in some lesser price neighborhoods that have boards on the windows. I mean, it's a drastic difference. So trying to, again, put it all in the same box and say across the board in this area, what should I get? 2 blocks can make a big difference.
Yeah, you mentioned Little Italy, and that's funny because the first question where I said you could buy a property for $60,000 with great cash flow, that property, which I had 4 different people from Biggerpockets ask me about the same 2 properties, were probably a 10-minute drive from Little Italy, and yet really rough areas, and yet go by Little Italy and you got some great cash flowing properties. So.
You got different territories going on right now. You got the university, hospital, metro health, those types of things where you might have pockets of older homes that are renting for really high dollar amounts because nurses or doctors are coming in and staying in those temporarily, and they're able to demand higher rents. But then again, 2 blocks away, you might be getting $450 in rent because it's a property that just wasn't taken care of or something like that. It's all about those little pockets.
And the best way to figure that out is to call one of us. And I don't mean Blaze or me. I mean anybody on this call. We all know the areas, and if we don't know the areas, we figure it out. But pretty much now we're all getting a handle on all the different areas.
Yeah, if you
And then
don't
we have
know,
property management that will explain the different market areas too. So
right, right. If you don't know, when you get out of the car, you're going to know almost immediately, by what's going on in the neighborhood. So it's not hard to figure out. What's hard to figure out is when you're sitting in a different state and you don't know the area very well, you're trying to drill down and estimate rents. And it's hard to do that because even on like a Biggerpockets rent estimator, you could put in a zip code, but there are so many territories within one zip code that just, it's hard to do.
yeah, one zip code doesn't have just one area.
We're fortunate because we can use other tools other than apartments.com or the Biggerpockets rent estimator and things like that. We can dive into the MLS and see what stuff has actually rented for recently in certain territories. And that gives us a little bit more of a competitive advantage than your regular investor. But you got the tools that you got to work with to try to estimate in the first place. So, again, it's all about those pockets and you can't fit it into the box. What's the next question, Scott?
What amount should I use for expenses as a template when calculating returns?
$150. Well, I'll go over the basics that we use,
Okay.
and there is some flexibility in there. But first off, we're going to look at the real estate taxes. That's part of your operating. We're looking at what your operating expenses are. We're going to look at real estate taxes. We're going to look at annual repairs that you're going to put into that property. The toilet clogs, the furnace break, whatever annual repairs that you're going to put into that property. If the house happens to be where there's an association, which we don't come across as many with our investment property, but in some areas, we're going to look at association dues, or if they're buying condos that are rentable, we're going to be looking at that. For most of the Biggerpockets people, most of them are out of state. Not all of them, but most of them are out of state. So you're going to have a management fee, and you got to factor that in. Winter in Cleveland plus grass, you're either going to have your tenants doing the landscaping or you're going to hire somebody to come out and do the landscaping. Insurance. What about utilities? Do we estimate utilities on that property?
I personally, will if the MLS is filled out correctly, usually you have enough information to do it. But the
Yes.
the information provided is only as good as the realtor that put it in. So if there's not the information there to use, you got to kind of estimate for that and try to figure that out. Because one of the things I mentioned it earlier in the call is you got different properties that, they may be heated with one boiler system and it heats 3 units. Well, obviously the heat is being paid by the owner, or that owner may be breaking up that heat into 33% per unit in the rents. There's all kinds of ways that this could be constructed, but the more information that you have, the better that you can analyze it. But again, you can't put it all into that same box, because if you try, you're either going to talk yourself out of really good cash flowing properties, or you're going to buy a property that doesn't cash flow real well because you didn't look at it on an individual basis.
So when we take that property that you've already spent time looking at, we're going to update our numbers because we want to make sure you're making a good decision. So we're looking at the utilities. We're trying to find out from the other agent if they didn't put it in properly, what we have there. You still have advertising, supplies, and other miscellaneous stuff. So we take into factor all that stuff. If you're doing a house hack, there's other factors going into it. So we look at all the different costs that go into you buying that property. And those are your operating expenses. You still have your cost of buying the property, your down payment, your closing costs, possibly if there's costs that have to, something big that has to be done in order to make it rentable right off the bat, such as it has to have a new roof day one, or it has to have a furnace put in day one, something to that effect.
There's a great point is in some of our suburbs, again, why you can't put it all in one box is some of our suburbs have a point of sale, others don't. So with a point of sale, what's happening is you're going to have to complete the township or city, whatever municipality requires that point of sale. They're going through that property and saying, hey, here's the deficiencies that we found, and we want you to remedy these within a certain amount of time. Now, either the buyer can pay for that with the purchase or just after, or the seller can take care of those. How that is taken care of really affects how these numbers work, because I had one where I must have got 10 investors calling me within 2 hours, all about the same property. But unfortunately, what it was the numbers ran really, really well. But there was $85,000 estimated point of sale remedies that had to go along with that. So now our low purchase price and high returns right out the window. So again, it's a case by case basis. You can't put it all in the same box.
Now, as the market's shifting, and the market is shifting, before it was almost automatically assumed that the buyer is going to assume all those repairs. When they're having trouble finding as many buyers for their properties, they're going to be willing to take care of a lot of those repairs too. So the market's going to shift and give you more negotiation in there.
Right. Hey, Scott, these are some great questions. You want to go on to the next one?
Sure. What rental amount should I expect to see in a certain city if I spend $165,000?
You want to take that one?
Well, I'll just say this, that every area, just like we've been saying, has different rents coming in. Doesn't matter what the sale price is necessarily. There's still the common rents for the areas and for the type of property. What if it has a 2-bedroom and 2 full bath? It's going to get you more rent than 2-bedroom and 1 full bath, all right? Or 3 bedrooms versus 2 bedrooms. So every unit is going to bring in different rents, and then the areas are going to bring in different rents. What I will tell you is, before we tell you what that house is worth paying, we're going to make sure that the rents are making a cash flow for you. Why buy something in a negative cash flow unless there's a long-range plan that says you're going to reap huge profits afterwards? So
the other thing that comes into play is, was it priced right in the first place? Because sometimes a $165,000 house that was listed should only be listed at $135,000. They just were greedy and they priced it wrong in the first place. So again, hard to put it in the box. The other thing that's going to come into account is it a 2-story versus a ranch? A ranch style house all on one floor tends to attract a retired or maybe a more wealthy renter, because there's more of a demand for that. There's less of those 1-level rental properties out there than there are the 2 stories. So you're able to get sometimes higher rents for a ranch versus a 2-story where all the bedrooms are up or something like that.
Or even 2 stories that are side by side versus up and down, with 1 unit on the first floor and 1 unit on the second floor. Side by sides will bring you in a little better rent than if they have to go upstairs versus that, so.
And the most obvious one in the world is condition. You got something with shag carpet, smells like smoke, and has the old mustard color appliances. It's not getting as much rent as the apartment that has new luxury vinyl flooring, granite countertops, and stainless steel appliances. 2 entirely different ballparks.
I like my shag carpeting. Stop making fun of my house.
Scott, what do you got? What other questions?
So in the first conversation that we're having, can you send me the names of your property managers that you use?
Okay, so on that,
all sorts of stuff, but if you're not buying in that area, what good is it?
Exactly. That's the hard part, is most people, when they call, they don't know exactly where they're going to buy. So to send you 5 or 6 different property managers because you're trying to cover all the territories doesn't make sense. It's pretty much the same across the board. You're looking somewhere between 10 and 12%. So when you run your numbers, run it based on that. But when we find the right property, that's where we would provide a property manager's name for you. Because there's no use in wasting a bunch of time trying to talk to 5 or 6 property managers when you're never going to buy in their territory. And they may have
And the
different
property
areas.
manager's going to the property manager's going to want an address. I mean, they're going to want to know where you're buying before they're going to be able to tell you anything too.
Absolutely.
That's a real good point, Scott.
Yep.
All right, what lender do you recommend?
Another tough one. You know, again, can't put it all in the same box because has a lot to do with the person on the other end of the phone and what their credit and income position is. Also has to do with what type of property they're buying. You know, if you're buying over 4 units, you're no longer in a residential world where you're going to your regular banks or your regular mortgage company. You're going to more of a commercial lender. If you're buying 4 units or below, well, there's several different lenders that we can recommend. But again, that's all going to depend on the person on the other end of the phone, the investor themselves.
Or you only want to close in your corporation, or you want to do a self-directed IRA. All these are going to bring you to different lenders.
So again, same box. You can't put them all in the same box. There's so many different answers.
Since there are different lenders, how do we handle it? Do we have lenders we trust for all that stuff?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I got your name and number from Biggerpockets, and I'd like to purchase a rental property in Cleveland.
Okay.
That's for that question.
Heard all the. Go ahead. You're laughing. You got the answer on this one.
Well, there's a lot of it. First off, we get that because I think they think of Cleveland as this whole area, the north coast, the northeast coast area is Cleveland. There's so many areas outside of the city, Cleveland, the Cleveland proper. And when we're going to talk about Cleveland proper, to me, an important thing is to talk about the lead-based paint ordinance.
Sure.
I mean, Cleveland's the only city in our area that has a lead-based paint ordinance, and it's so new, we don't really know what to expect yet. And you are seeing some investors pulling stakes in Cleveland and moving to other areas because they don't know what to expect. And I can go into detail on that, but the bottom line is, as an investor in the city of Cleveland, you're required to have your house, meaning you're going to pay to have your house tested every 2 years. And if lead-based paint is found, you're going to pay for mitigation. Now, what that mitigation consists of and what that cost is going to be, that's the unknown at this point. It's just too new. We haven't seen enough examples of it.
Right. When you got to have the guy come in the full white suit and the mask and everything, they tend to charge a lot more than your typical paint. Yeah. The other thing that the other reason people call and they ask about Cleveland is that's the city that they know. But they don't realize just to the south, within 45 minutes, you've got Akron, you've got Canton, which are cities in their own right. You know, and each of those cities have their own little suburbs, as well as Cleveland has its own little suburbs. So when you call about Cleveland, it's not just fit into a box. There are so many more opportunities here in Northeast Ohio that we can help you out with.
Yeah, and they just hear Cleveland. But the bottom line is they hear Cleveland because it's landlord friendly. This whole area is landlord. The state of Ohio is landlord friendly.
Yeah, I mean, the lead-based paint ordinance in Cleveland, the bottom line is lead-based paint applies everywhere. If you've got lead-based paint in a rental, you've got to address it in some way, shape, or form. You don't want little kids eating the potato chips off the floor. You know, that's just.
Yeah, but if I can hire a painter to encapsulate my paint versus the men in the white suit.
Right, it's cheaper.
And if the county or the city is not making me test, it's upon me, and I can do what I want when I want.
Right.
When one of the property managers we talked with said the biggest problem are windows.
Yeah.
The old windows that slide up and down, and there's lead dust in the sill.
My recommendation to anybody when we talk about this, and I say, if you're going to buy a house in the city of Cleveland, we're going to recommend that it's either brick or vinyl sided, because aluminum gets painted too and has been painted over the years. Brick or vinyl sided, all windows have been replaced, and the basement foundation interior has not been painted, because those older houses, most of those houses they're buying in the city of Cleveland are older and they're moist, and you see these houses where it's just peeling all along the basement walls. All right.
Sure.
And it's been painted like the old Lakewood houses. Corey and I both used to own those houses. Now, they've been painted so many times, and as they peel, you've got layers and layers. But you're right. The majority of Blaze likes to say eating those lead-based paint chips, but the truth is, what happens is you open those windows, it creates a lead dust. That lead dust gets out, and it's micro. It's under 3 microns. It gets on toys and other stuff. A kid touches the toy. A kid puts his hand in his mouth. That's where the lead-based paint poisoning comes from.
But it's a federal rule. I mean, on all residential properties, if it was built before 1978, we have to get a lead-based paint disclosure signed. So it's not that just Cleveland is just doing a better job of enforcing it than other cities may be doing. That's really the big difference.
Signatures are just telling you that you've either tested or you haven't tested. You have knowledge or you don't have knowledge. So that's all you're disclosing. Once even as a seller, if a buyer wants to buy my house and they say they want to have lead-based paint test, I may or may not want to accept that contract, because that's a condition that if he chooses to walk away and I've tested and I found it, now do I have to mitigate? What do I have to do?
Sure. What's your next question, Scott?
Well, when I'm looking at rental properties, should I be looking for the ones with the highest cash flow?
Let's go back to that area right outside Little Italy. Cash flow was amazing. Yeah. When they're making the payments, when you're not going through foreclosure, when you're not, or foreclosure eviction. I went to that first property and by the way, this was in the city of Cleveland, that $60-some thousand property that had amazing cash flow, and I drove out there to check it. First off, it had peeling paint everywhere. That was my first red flag. But in that couple block radius, there was 4 evictions going on. I knew that because the stuff was piled up in the driveways. They were just moved out. There was at least 3 buildings that had plywood over all the windows. That's the area where you're getting that. That's where you're getting that highest cash flow, because it's only cash flow while they're paying you. If they're not paying you, and you've got to take time to evict, and you've got to take time to rehab the property, you're not getting cash flow at that point. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is if you can run numbers because a home is real cheap and taxes appear cheap, but you don't look at, you can't foresee what is going to happen with each tenant. So if you've got an eviction, there's the downtime while the property is vacant. There's the cost of the eviction. There's your property management fee while the eviction's gone. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into it that you can't see, and it can happen over and over again. So each time that happens, your high returns, they get reduced, and they get reduced very quickly.
I'd rather do than a high cash flow any given time. I'd rather do it backwards burr. That's a made-up term by me, a backwards burr. Bottom line is, because we get a lot of people that come in and they want to do the burr program, pay cash, rehab it, and then rent it out and refinance it. That's a burr, all right? And that's hard for an out-of-state investor to do. It is hard for them to be successful with it. However, they can go and instead of waiting to refinance it, buy it now, finance it, buy it now for whatever. Let's say you buy a property for $165,000, and you're making money on it right now as it's rented, and you're in a place that rents are anywhere from say $600 to $950, depending on the shape of the units. All right, and right now it's renting out. One unit's at $600, one's at $650, and you're making a little bit of money, not a ton of money. So you immediately go in there, and as soon as that lease is up, you up their rent to the next level. And they either say, great, I'll pay it. Now you're making more money, slowly making more money. Or they say, you know what, Scott, I'm going to move on in 2 months when my lease is up. And you say, fine. And then you hire a contractor to come in and update the carpeting or the flooring, paint it, update the kitchen. And now you're renting it for, instead of $750, you're renting it for $900. All right. And then you do that with the other unit too. So you're taking that property up, and in another year, it's going to be worth more money too.
Absolutely. The contractors right now are so booked out. That's a very difficult piece because everybody wants the burrs. They want to buy something that needs renovation. But I called all my handymen yesterday, say, how far are you out on your jobs? The least amount I found was 8 weeks. So 8 weeks, you're talking about 2 months of waiting to they even start the job. And then how long will it take beyond that for them to get completed? So all that time, your property is vacant and you're not earning any income. Where if you buy a property, like you said, you're at least getting it and you can kind of wait until the market changes a little bit and hire a contractor that does a great job that can complete it, because the only contractors that are able to do it within a month or 2 weeks are the ones that aren't very good and don't get a lot of recommendations.
You mean you want to say I need an upfront advance and then go out on a vendor and then you forget, you never hear from them?
Absolutely.
And,
yep.
And I'm not making that up because we've had Biggerpockets people call and tell us that it's happened.
Oh, right? Yeah.
So it happens. And it's a smarter move to just get the right ones that need freshening but are rentable or rented right now, because now you're hiring that guy 2 months out to come in and do this work. He's giving you an estimate. That's another thing too with these BRRRRs, these out-of-state people. You've got to get a contractor that's willing to go through that property and tell you how much it's going to cost you for all the work that needs to be done. And unless you're paying them just to go and visit the properties, you're gonna good luck. And then what's the price of materials 2 months from now? Is it the same as today?
Yeah. You know? My favorite investment deal right now to find is to find a nice property, like you said, brick or new windows or newer roof. Price is not going to hit the ball out of the ballpark with cash flow. But what has happened is the current landlord has rented to the tenant for 10 years. They became friends. He sees them every time he's over there mowing the yard, and they became friends. So instead of charging the $1,000 that it should be getting, he's only charging them $450 or $500. And when you really research the property, you see with a little bit of work, this could be $1,000 rental. That's the ones I love to see, because they've underpriced it and they don't want to raise the rents on that tenant because they're their friends. So what do? They sell it so the new landlord can be the bad guy.
I always hear, in fact, I've got one coming to the market Friday, and he goes, no, he's a nice guy. He doesn't cause any issues. He's been there for 6 years. When did you raise the rent last? Because I've never raised it.
6 years. I mean, the reality is what should rents go up each year? Somewhere, I'm not talking about 2021, 22. I'm talking about on a regular, everyday year.
Basis, should be about 3%.
Yeah, somewhere between 3 and 4%. So if you systematically raise rents and you don't look for cash flow year one necessarily, it's great if you can get it, but you forecast out 4 or 5 years like we do on our spreadsheet for all of our clients, they can see, all right, I'm not going to make a ton of money in year one, but in year 5, this is a really good property if I do things right. If I screen my tenants properly, and get the right people in there and systematically raise rents, I end up with a property that is a home run, but I had to take a base hit to get there.
Right.
What else you got, Scott?
Well, you were talking earlier about the market changing and, how much under the asking price now that the market's changing should I expect?
So I think what they're asking there is in some of these bigger markets like California, that's probably where we get most of our clients calling from, California or New York. They do this. They do mountain spikes. They're really, really high in great markets. They're really low in low markets. In Cleveland, we're just kind of a real slow market where it goes up and down very slow. So where they're experiencing prices dropping rapidly because their economy has changed, we're still not seeing that. The only thing that's changed for us is instead of getting 20 offers on one property, now we're getting 4 or 5, which is still an awesome market.
Well, Blaze and I even went through the market in the 08 shift. I mean, I'm so old. I went through the market on Black Monday, which was what, 87?
87.
I was in that market. I was just brand new in that market. So our markets, when they come down, they don't come down like everywhere else. It's exactly that. We don't go up like everybody else either. We're a very static market, and that's a nice thing.
Yeah, because it's not
always. You know what keeps going up is rents.
Yep, that's exactly what I was just about to say. All right, so bottom line is, I think with these interviews is what we're trying to get across to you is you can't take a rental property or an investor mentality and try to fit it all into one box. you got to hire a team of people, whether it be your property manager, your lender, your realtor. You want somebody that has the ability to dive into each of these properties and give you some good, solid information so that you can make an educated decision versus trying to fit it all in one box and just blanket it across the board. It just doesn't work that way.
And that starts with this group right here, the Brady Bunch.
We got Greg in the middle. All right, listen, I appreciate everybody's times. We're right at 30 minutes, which is perfect. I'm going to go ahead and end the live, and you guys stay on and we'll finish up our meeting.